Hello, I'm Lee Carroll.
I'm Monika Marani.
And I'm Joe Hehn.
Yay!
Welcome to another program that we call Topics for Our Times. This is the 6th episode in the series. This show is based on many things that are difficult to deal with in life, so very hard to talk about. But every so often, there's an individual who's exceptional, unusual, and helps us to work the puzzle. You know, life is this way, and there are many who experience really tough things to deal with. It's more common than we think. And this is one of those. All of them are about heroic recovery and balance.
Now, not only have we met those who have recovered from unspeakable things, but they've become champions at helping others through the same issues. And this is what this program is all about. There's so many kinds of situations and so many stories to tell. And Lee and I want to present the gems, a peek into the lives of some of the ones who are making a difference in their life and in the lives of others.
The past 5 Topics for Our Time programs have met with such heartfelt thanks from so many of you. Thank you. And we know that many will relate to this one as well. Let me introduce to you one of those gems we speak about, someone who went through it, figured it out, and wants to help others on the same path. We wish to present for you, live in our studio, Mr. Joe Hehn. Welcome.
Yay! Welcome, Joe.
Thanks for having me back.
Yeah, I understand that it was a very long trip to get here. Is that right?
Yes, it took 0.9 miles to walk here, so I left an extra 4 minutes early. It was a nice stroll. We live, my fiance and my little guy, just down the street, and so
awesome.
Beautiful Southern California morning.
Oh.
I love that. And so for those of you who have met Joe before, we have a program called Healing Wednesday where Joe was featured on our program, and his story was so compelling. We wanted to share it with everyone on this format because there was more to the story that we didn't get on Healing Wednesday. But let's tell you all more about Joe before we get to the story. Joe Hehn is a mindset and spiritual coach, author, and speaker. He's deeply passionate about helping others transform their lives by teaching them how to wield the power of their mind and spirit. Encouraged by his late wife to write a book, Joe began doing so as he continued traveling the world, healing, finding meaning, and learning, all while expanding his own understanding of his own mind and spirit.
Dreams of Antiquity is the story he is meant to share with all of us. It's an epic tale of one man's soulful quest through many incarnations and learning to love again. Joe, welcome to the show and to the program.
Thank you for having me back. It was really nice to receive that email and be like, "We want you back," and I'm like, "Why?" But it was just really great because I had such a fun time the first time, and to kind of come back and explore an even deeper significance in my story, I'm just really, really grateful. So thank you both for having me here.
Oh, for us, it's an absolute pleasure and honor. And the title of this episode is From Heartbreak to Happiness. And Joe went through an incredible experience of heartbreak and loss, and he shared some of those details with us again on Healing Wednesday. So, Joe, for those who are watching for the first time and getting to know you, can you take us through that experience that you went through and what happened?
Thank you, Monika. Yeah, heartbreak is definitely the term I would use, but it didn't seem like that was ever going to be a possibility for me back in the day. I had a really enriching life. I don't know that I saw that, and I kind of probably took it for granted a little bit, but things really came together, and it was a kind of abundant season. I was with this beautiful woman who ended up becoming my fiance, and we were engaged for 2 years, and we had a really long courtship living in Chicago. I was doing well, had a great job, great social network and community and family lifestyle, having a lot of fun and finding value in life. And I feel that when you have those seasons, that we never really understand how special they can be, and you kind of look for the next best thing. And I found myself starting to do that a little bit, getting outside of what was really a magical season and time in my life. And life kind of makes you realize that you shouldn't be taking that for granted, and it can humble you. And I feel that happened with the diagnosis of my wife receiving cancer. So it happened about a year after our marriage. We got married in Costa Rica, and it was a really magical, beautiful ceremony and time. We're like on top of a mountain, and hawks were circling above as the sun is setting into the ocean. Just kind of very poetic and magical. And then we came back to life, and shortly after that, she received her diagnosis. Came out of the blue, and it was for lung cancer. It wasn't much to it at first. It was, of course, terrifying, but we felt pretty confident that we could navigate this as best we possibly could. She was asymptomatic. We kind of found it at a good time, but we were just slung into this state of kind of chaos, but trying to really hold on to our love, being really an anchor into and through this challenging season. So we looked for treatment options and things were okay, but then we had to suffer the loss of her father, who was also diagnosed with cancer. Then my grandfather passed away. So it was a really hard season. But Jessica, my late wife, she was doing well. Again, asymptomatic, and then ultimately got the notification and the celebratory response from the doctors that she was in remission. So all of our hard work through all of these different treatments and looking for hospitals and everything, it was successful. So we were really celebrating. But unfortunately, it didn't last super long, because a couple months after that, she was admitted to the hospital. We thought it was food poisoning or something, and they found dozens of tumors in her brain. And that's where things got extremely serious, because now it was all hands on deck. And we had to move in with my parents at the time. We moved out of our apartment in Chicago, and everything was critical and crucial. She actually had to have life-saving brain surgery, like whisked off to the hospital, everybody sitting there waiting in the waiting room, waiting for some kind of news, taking hours, that very anxiety-riddled experience. But we got good news, and that they were able to do what they needed to buy more time and to kind of get some grounding into health and wellness. So we moved in with my parents at the time, and that's when things became a true test, because there was all these treatment options and all of this stuff that we had to do, and she was battling a very, very vicious form of disease. And so we were constantly going in and out of the hospital. I ended up spending maybe 60 nights in total with her in the hospital, never missing a night, always being by her side, holding her hand, being that source of encouragement, empowerment, and positivity. But outside of that room, I was feeling like I was being crushed to death, because you're facing mortality, and something so extremely important is just lingering in that doorway between spaces, between realms, and it's terrifying. And so I would have the surface positivity and optimism, but deep within it was the true struggle and battle that I was going through. And I just found my thinking mind and my beliefs were all tethered to, like, oh my gosh, is she going to pass away? So you're constantly dealing with those thoughts. That force is so tremendous when you're in the thick of it. And I think that was a bigger struggle than actually being her caretaker, like caring for her, lifting her up, giving her the baths, the meals, and all the late nights and the dozen ER visits. But something beautiful came of that too, which I think kind of served to temper the steel of our soulful bond, was that as a couple, and anybody who's married or been in a long-term relationship knows, you have certain grievances. You have certain criticisms. I was kind of short-tempered, and I'm not going to speak bad of her, but I had certain things I could say about her back then. And all of that stuff was incinerated, because it's just not important. That all the grievances, all the little criticisms, all the complaints, all the, like, he could be doing this better and that, it all goes away, because it's like the top layer of the onion. And we were peeling down to the heart and soul of what it meant to love one another. And so we would never be gifted that true soulful bond, which I think was one of the most precious things I've received in this life, if not for the mortality staring at us on a regular daily basis. And we went through a lot of trials and tribulations, but I started trying to train my mind to find the gratitude even in the very scary places. Like when I had to pick her up off the chair to walk her over to the bathroom, we would stabilize her. And so I would sit there and pick her up and then hold her by the elbows and be like, hey, are you okay? I'm here. Get your grounding, center. And we would do a little dance. And so here I am dancing with my wife, and we would giggle and we will chuckle. And I feel like we catapulted into being 90 years old and stabilizing one another and having this almost love that was from a life very long, a very well-lived, beautiful, romantic time together and season. So I started training my mind to try to really embrace those moments, but they were far and few between because it was just so scary and so challenging. And ultimately, the cancer started gaining momentum. And one day, we had to whisk her off to the ER again, and that crazy, fearful ride to the hospital. She couldn't breathe. And my father and I were together in the room with her, and it was chaos. We were in the ER. Even the doctors were all scrambling around trying to figure out what to do because her body was at the point of breaking because she couldn't get oxygen and she was fighting for the last of her life pretty much. So they had to induce a coma. And I remember her screaming from across the room and just so frantic and so terrified, but the chaos slowed and time seemed to kind of seep through as I knelt before her bed and I clutched her hands and I looked her in the eye, and through the labored breath, the mask and everything of trying to get her oxygen, I just said the three most powerful words that you can say with that soulful heart is, I love you. And she took her mask off and said, I love you too. And that was the last time we corresponded. And 3 days later, many of you have seen the scenes in the movies where the family members are surrounding the bed, the hospital bed with its stark white sheets.
Whoa.
Yeah, it's just almost inconceivable,
Yeah.
isn't it, when that happens? Your brain almost can't figure it out.
My heart finds this hard to listen to.
Yeah, thank you both so much. So from there, we are all surrounding the bed, and it felt like the clan surrounding that floating funeral pyre before it was launching into that new realm, that new transition. And I never really, through all of my time with my wife and the battle and the constant positivity and trying to be that source of encouragement, I never really put together that maybe she could pass away. You would have the thoughts, but I never thought it would be a reality. Because one, I didn't want to believe that would be a reality. But two, it just never really occurred. I envisioned our entire life together, being family, moving to the suburbs, being parents, grandparents even. You project well into the future and you see yourself ending up on that porch in the rocking chair, holding hands and looking out over the horizon. And so the thought of not having that, I was so absorbed in that identity and that dream, that beauty, that it never occurred to me that I would hear the doctors say, she's not in there anymore. And that I'd have to muster up the confidence to pull her off life support and say goodbye. And I took as much time as I needed preparing myself in the room with Jessica, holding her hands and just telling her everything that was within my heart and soul that she already knew, but I needed to say it again as I prepared to say goodbye. And after many hours of me having this time with her, I called everybody into the room and we just prayed as a family over her and said goodbye. And it was the hardest thing I've ever had to do in my life. And I remember walking out of the hospital 15 minutes later, and I just kind of went to a grassy area and looked up to the sky because it was in the very early hours of the next morning, and just praying and just believing that she was already up there making her way and speaking to her. And then I came back in, and we kind of gathered ourselves and prepared to leave, and I was with my folks. And in the back of the car on the way home with them, and I asked, what time did she pass away? And my father goes, 3:25. And I said, 3:25? He's like, yeah, it was 3:25 in the morning. I go, that's our wedding anniversary, March 25th. And that was the first sign, the first coincidence that was just too profound to be a coincidence, that maybe there's something to that. And that was kind of like the first clue you find leading down a very mysterious but enlightening path. And I believe that was a gift from her. I still do. And so that was the first thing to happen. And then over the next few days, you're trying to grasp what's happened. You're trying to make sense while preparing for the arrangements. And we did a celebration of life, not in the morgue. In the funeral homes with all that, where it's just so, for me, I always felt it was so like sad, and that you're grieving the loss of a life instead of celebrating the gift of life. And so we had a celebration of life, and a lot of color, a lot of butterflies, a lot of beautiful energy and conversations and memories shared. And we celebrated her. And after that season, and during those few days and week, I started receiving more signs. I really didn't understand it at the time, because this was me kind of dipping my toe into what happens after death. But I was getting pretty clear and encouraging messages from Jessica. And then all of a sudden, her phone rang. And you don't disconnect the phone right away for personal reasons. It's a one step you never think you're going to have to do, and you just don't do it. So you just kept her phone on. And then I see the phone is buzzing one day with a text message. And this would happen frequently, where people would be like, hey, checking in on you, or just, I miss you, people who knew that she passed, but some people who knew that or hadn't known that she passed. And so I get a text message, and it says, hey, honey, I'm just thinking about you. You're coming to my mind a lot, and I just feel like I'm meant to reach out. So I text this person back, and I said, hey, I'm sorry to have to be the one to tell you this, but Jessica passed a few days ago, or whatever the time period was. And she's like, I know this is going to sound strange to you, but I'm a spiritual medium. And now this is making a lot more sense. I believe Jessica's coming to me to talk to you. And so my analytical man brain goes, sure, what do you want? Like, what's this about, right? But my grieving heart was like, tell me everything. And I led with my heart. And she started telling me stuff that she could not have known. And so it was very convincing. She wasn't trying to sell me time with her or anything. She was friends with Jessica and wanted to help Jessica's husband. And so she said, the very first message that I'm receiving from Jessica, now that we're connected, is she wants you to write a book, to tell a story. And it meant nothing to me. I really didn't understand at all that sign, that direction. And I wasn't meant to at that time. And then she said, Jessica also wants you to read a book. And that book was called The Afterlife of Billy Fingers. And it was just about this gentleman who is able to communicate with his sister here on earth after he passed away, and just kind of his experience. And it's a really good book for introducing oneself to the idea that maybe death is not the end. Because that's what I had thought. That's what I was raised to think, to know, to believe. That was my culture, my social conditioning, my family conditioning. So this was going against everything I knew. And so it was scary, and it was hard. And I'm, of course, grieving the loss of my wife at this time. And so I read that book, but I was embarking on a new journey altogether, because as I stated before, I foresaw my entire life lived out with Jessica. And she was my best friend, my lover, my soulmate, my business partner, my wife, all of these identities. And in one breath, all of those were taken away from me. And what I didn't realize is that in the same time, I was her best friend and her soulmate and her husband and her business partner and her lover and all of these identities that were stricken away from me. So I felt empty because we place a tremendous value in who we are, going around telling people what we do for work and passion and what we've done and how we're successful and how many kids we have and that we're married for how many years. And we kind of have this bullet-pointed resume. And the majority of my resume was taken away with her final breath. And so the life that I had in Chicago did not have any luster. It was dark and scary. And I knew I needed to go somewhere and do something kind of extreme. So all of our stuff was still in storage. And I was living at my parents' house. And I got rid of our business, our health and wellness business that we had in Chicago. And we had savings that we were trying to put towards buying a house. And I bought a one-way ticket to Colombia and decided that I'm going to start traveling the world and just trying to figure out this new season. Because if Jessica is supposedly communicating with me from the beyond, and she seems to be doing really okay. The energy I picked up, the messages were all of bliss and joy and encouragement and love. She transitioned to what I was for her, being a caretaker. She was now taking care of me because I was the wounded one. And if she's in that space and I'm here, I put it together that there must be a sacred purpose to me being here. There must be a reason, almost like a choice of me being here. And that's what I set out to discover for myself. So I thought by traveling the world and volunteering, soul-searching, healing, I could start making some realizations for myself. And I read that book and kind of journeyed into South America with a friend, going from place to place, teaching people English, helping women learn self-defense, volunteering at children's hospitals, teaching them English, after-school programs, and traveling from one country to the next. But I realized that all the travel was a distraction. The volunteering, even though it was a beautiful thing to do, and anybody who's helped another person knows how enriching that is for yourself, I was a broken man, and I couldn't sustain this very much longer, and I got very, very sick in Bolivia. And I feel that you have like 4 pillars of existence. You have your spiritual, mental, emotional, and physical. And my mental and emotional were just non-existent because of the grief and the anguish and the suffering. And the physical dipped down into nothingness because I got very, very sick. And I was having very, very bad thoughts. The worst kind of thoughts that you can have of not wanting to live anymore. I wasn't making any plans, but I definitely was getting sick and tired of being on earth, especially with the notion that she's in bliss, she's doing great wherever she is. But if this is a sacred plight, then I have to figure out another way. I have to make a transition for myself so that I can start discovering some stuff within and externally that makes me happy, that makes me feel that love again that I felt with her. Because everywhere I went, everything I did, I was looking at life without her. So it was the deepest form of attachment, expectation. And I realized that the food went bland, the experiences were dull, the places were not as bright because I was seeing in black and white. I was living a life that could never be fulfilling because it was always missing something. And that happened to be my wife. And over time, I decided that I needed to change that perspective. That was the thing that was destroying me. And that I knew I could reinvent my perspective by training my mind, my thoughts, my beliefs to celebrate the time I had with her as a gift. And now this new season that I've entered, to make the most of this with that gift being the wind in my sails. I ended up going back home for a small stint to Chicago, and I was walking down the street, and it's the dead of winter in Chicago, and I was covering my ears. I was meeting a dear friend, very close friend of mine, for lunch, and not many people at all knew. I didn't make this social announcement I'm coming back home, I actually felt a little defeated because I wasn't still continuing to travel the world and volunteer. So I kind of kept to myself, only meeting the people that were very, very close. So I'm walking down the street, but I had already decided to move to Costa Rica in a week, where we were married, the country there, and to try to invest in my own sacred journey of healing without traveling from country to country, place to place, volunteering. And so I'm walking down the street in Chicago, and the wind is whipping by. It's -20 or something ridiculous, and my ears feel like they're going to be torn off my head. And I'm like, should I get earmuffs? Like, you have that question. Should I go invest in earmuffs when I'm leaving to go to Costa Rica, where it's 85 degrees and 90% humidity in 6 days? And my analytical mind's like, no, that's stupid, right? But I'm walking for 4 blocks, covering my ears, and I finally show up at the restaurant, and I sit down, and my friend is late, and I get a text from the spiritual medium who's been guiding me ever since, helping me, giving the messages from Jessica, the signs, and telling me what they mean. And she just goes, Jessica told me to tell you to cover your ears. And
Oh my goodness. That is just such
I love this part.
beautiful, beautiful woman logic.
Oh,
Because
yeah.
I would have done the same thing. Buy
Yeah.
the earmuffs, get
Yeah.
rid of them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is already such proof that we believe. Yeah.
Yeah, and it was refreshing because it was a sense of humor, that spirit, that the universe, that the world as I saw it with source and everything has, and that really just fulfilled me in that sense that you have this relationship after you lose somebody, and you believe that because you can't communicate, because they're not in the room with you, that you stop talking. You actually kind of stop having the relationship. And it's kind of like, if I weren't able to speak with my spouse, I would find a new way to communicate. I would write things down. I would use my phone or a letter or notepad or something, and we would still engage in that communication. And that's what this was. It was her communicating with me in a new form. And so I started opening up my perspective to look for these things, because I wanted to receive any kind of signs that were flowing into my life from Jess. And life got a lot more magical, because now I'm dialing into the spiritual path, not looking at all of the little fault and flaws and the struggles from day to day and paying bills and this happening and traffic and all the things. I'm looking for the beauty in life, for those signs, those spiritual nudges and encouragement. And so everything took a shift upwards, and the timing was great, because I ended up moving to Costa Rica after buying earmuffs, of course, for 6 days, and donating those to my brother before I left. And I settled into Costa Rica. And that's where I really started training and learning and educating myself on the power of one's mind. And I started reading a lot of scripture, texts, universal truths, esoteric, spiritual considerations, a lot of self-help books, while working on my physical and spiritual well-being. So a ton of meditation, swimming in the ocean, getting sunlight, being active, going on hikes, doing everything I could to enrich my body, to help my body fuel my mind and my spirit for the better. And eventually, through all of this adventure, traveling through Costa Rica here and there, but kind of having it dialed into a main spot, I decided I wanted to go on a bigger adventure and buy a old Land Rover, a 1971 Land Rover, and drive it all the way back to Chicago. And everybody, including my mother, thought I was absolutely ludicrous and insane because of all the horrid stories you would hear about the different countries between Costa Rica and the United States. And I didn't listen. I didn't care. There was something within me that knew I was meant to go on this voyage, and that it wasn't going to be scary and horrible unless I thought it was going to be scary and horrible. And I didn't think that. I didn't believe that. I believed it was exactly what I needed to do. So I prepared this safari vehicle for a 10,000-mile trip. I was probably a little bit unrealistic about the capability of my truck, but through that adventure, I met a lot of people stranded on the side of the road from breakdowns, or in the desert, or in the jungles, and you learn that people love helping. And I went on this soulful journey. And all the while, I'm dreaming of Jess. She started visiting my dreams quite frequently and giving me guidance and messages. And it's not like I was dreaming of her. The dream was where we met. So it was like a location, like meeting a friend for coffee. So I'd go there and spend time with her. And depending on the season of my mental, emotional challenge, she would give me a little bit of advice, a little bit of guidance, just love, encouragement. So these things were very beautiful. My perspective is rising. I'm seeing that there's a transition between my perspective going from black and white to color. Because now I'm embracing this season, knowing that I was gifted to not only have Jess in my previous season, but now in this one in just a different capacity. And I am driving through Mexico. I've made it all the way to Mexico, all these crazy adventures, meeting all of these people. I read more afterlife books, understanding what happens to the soul after, which really helped liberate me from the grasp of grief there. And I pull into a little town outside of Puerto Vallarta one day, and I remember this. It was because the day before this crazy, beautiful event happened, I parked the car, go to get my bag, and I slung my backpack over my shoulder, and I'm walking to the little dwelling that I've got for the night or two, seeing the ocean and beautiful Mexico and everything, and I feel these things like crawling up my neck. And I'm like, oh, what is that? And I turn around, and there is a horde of ants crawling all over me, which, as you can imagine, not super comfortable. And so I'm doing the whole crazy like shake and samba and getting these ants off, and they were with me in the truck for seven hours. They came from a whole different place of Mexico, latched onto something that I had buried in the back of the truck, and I'm dancing around in this little village, like the only white guy around in this, and people I just saw, looked over, and the woman who was like sweeping just stopped and staring at this man who she doesn't know is covered in ants doing this crazy dance. And so you kind of see it from a macro perspective, and it's hilarious. And I eventually made my way back into the place free of ants. And I was going to leave very early the next morning, and I'm sitting there, but it's raining. It's pouring rain out, and it's about 4:30 in the morning. And I'm sitting there just kind of pondering life, and I'm reading the history of the world, and I'm learning about souls and reincarnation and the plight of the soul. And it hit me what book I was meant to write. And I thought of the very first chapter and the last chapter. All that while, I hadn't been really thinking about the story, the book that Jessica told me to write with her very first message. And it just dropped within me like an iron anvil. It was just so profound and magical and beautiful. And it was like my eureka moment. And I ended up being in the car that day driving, like crying, because I knew this story was so sacred and beautiful. And now I had this new charge, this new purpose to write this book. And eventually, after many more pit stops and little mishaps and adventures all through the rest of Mexico and the United States, I made it back to Chicago. And Chicago was still very, very hard for me to be within, because everywhere I would look, I would be reminded of where I was with Jess. We ate there, we did this, we went there, we were over at this space. And so I didn't want that reminder. I wanted to go experience newness and discover more so that I could continue my journey without kind of settling back in and trying to figure out my life. So I booked another one-way ticket, this time to Italy, where my family was from, my grandfather's side. And I found a place on the Amalfi Coast in Minori and rented a place and began writing my novel. Still growing and learning and studying. In Italy, I was studying, it was Marcus Aurelius and Stoicism. So trying to elevate and kind of correlating the culture of the place I was in with the beliefs of a certain faith that were aligned. And so I started learning a lot more about the power of my mind while writing Dreams of Antiquity, The Awakening. And then spent a tremendous amount of time there, still learning, still understanding my mind, still getting visitations from Jess, as well as signs and encouragement and the right people coming into my life for me to speak into their life, for them to speak into mine. And I noticed I was healing because I was giving other people advice on how to overcome some significance in their life. And it may not have been grief related, but we all grieve. The grief of a loved one is the most significant grief. But you can grieve over the grocery store being out of almond milk. Grief is basically the attachment to life not being what we're used to, what we'd wish for ourselves. And with losing a loved one, it's tremendous and almost rightly so. And so I started speaking into other people's lives, but I knew my journey there, I shouldn't be teaching truly just yet, and I needed to discover a lot more. And eventually made my way back to America for a short stint, and I moved to Southern California. And I got a place here, continuing my spiritual journey, and I continued traveling the world, learning about Buddhism while trekking the Himalayas in Nepal for many weeks and spending a lot of time out there and studying the Bhagavad Gita as I toured India and going to Rajasthan and the Ganga and bathing there and doing all of this spiritual sacred stuff, studying Sufism in the Sahara in the Middle East and visiting Africa and making my way around, learning as much as I could through the cultures while being guided by my wife. So helping to grow and elevate my mindset, the thoughts that I actually think and my beliefs, empowering my own beliefs. Before I had limiting beliefs and therefore my reality was limiting. So I chose to plant empowering and inspiring beliefs within myself and then think those thoughts and feel those emotions while traveling the world, learning from the great masters of those cultures and faiths and regions, and all the while writing Dreams of Antiquity. And that is the story of a man in Babylonia, a king who has a queen, and his queen falls ill. And she gets very, very sick and cannot survive that. And she succumbs, and he has to say goodbye. And then he can't live without her. And this man ends up perishing only to reincarnate in a new region, learning from that life as a different person altogether, sometimes male, sometimes female, and to navigate as the soul living in this new body, those life circumstances and learning little aspects, little seeds of realization and empowerment and each journey. And he continues to pass, but then to be reincarnated and making his way through China, learning about Taoism and Confucianism and learning from that and Egypt. And so that is the story. It's mirroring my own journey of traveling the world while my wife was guiding me, and just as his was guiding him through all the incarnations. And so that was the story I was meant to write, and this is book one, The Awakening, in this series. And so I have a lot more to write, but that's kind of taking us to where we are today.
And I think anyone who has experienced that loss, that significant heartbreak, whenever someone says, you will get through this, and you will find love again. In that moment, it's impossible to believe it is so. And yet, Joe, you introduced yourself living close to our studio with a beautiful partner and child. So tell us how that came about.
Thank you for asking that. It's a beautiful question. I'm happy to talk about that all day long because I love them dearly. What originally, the finding love, it's a really beautiful notion. And a lot of people would tell me during my grief, and sometimes way too early, not that I'm having attachment to them when they should tell me stuff that is supposed to help me, but they're like, you're going to find love again. And you don't want to hear that soon after your loved one passes away. But they were right in the sense that I did find love within. And that was my whole journey. My whole spiritual journey was learning to love myself as I was. Being even a widower and all the identity I had and all the concepts about myself and my value was strengthening those because I was a man who felt kind of like a victim and kind of imprisoned in this jail, this incarnation of losing my wife. And so I had to free myself of that by finding love within. And that's all I did when I traveled, is to secure that, to establish that, so it's self-sustaining source, thinking, believing, feeling that on a daily basis. And that's what I teach others to do. And ultimately, I discovered that. And now it is this self-sustaining magic and energy within myself that I feel humbled with gratitude for who I am and the life I am living. And with that, I knew I wanted to love again. I'm a very soulful man. I like to take care of people. I like that enrichment of the partnership. And I also wanted to be a father. And so as fate would have it, I started working on attracting that for myself, is having the visualizations of what it would be like to have the romance and to be in that new season. And I was very, very rusty at dating. I hadn't done anything like that for many, many years. And when I did date, I was a bartender in Chicago, so I didn't really have to try very hard. But now I'm not a bartender. I don't have that slab of wood and a lot of alcohol to date women. So I had to kind of get comfortable, and that's what the universe does. It gives you the experiences for you to grow through and become comfortable again. And so I did my best to date, but ultimately I walked into an office one day and I was working and doing some consulting and for this gentleman, and I walked in, and I would walk into a lot of dental offices, and I saw this woman, and I remember kind of losing my breath, and I went, oh wow. In my mind, I didn't say it out loud because that would have been creepy, but in my mind, I said, oh, wow. And I've only said that once before, and that was when Jessica stood on top of the flight of stairs in Costa Rica, coming down to be my wife. And I knew something was special in that moment in that office. And so I struck up a conversation with that girl, and we had a good connection. And ultimately, when I left, I talked to the gentleman who owned the place, the doctor there, and I said, hey, I know this is weird, and I don't want this to be the wrong message here, but I really felt this connection with Suzanne. Is there any way I can get her number? And he's like, we had dinner 4 days prior to that, and he's like, the weirdest thing happened. After we had dinner, he's like, I had a visualization that you two would end up together. And I was like, you're moving too fast for me right now.
Slow down.
Yeah, I just want her number.
Oh, yeah.
But he's not a very spiritual man. And so it was really a beautiful thing. And so I asked for her number, and she said no. Obviously, I'm friends with her boss. I live in San Diego. I was up near Sacramento in the Bay Area. And she's like, how could that ever work? But her teammates kind of encouraged her and said, it's just a phone number. You're going to have a conversation. And so ultimately she caved. And we had some great conversations over the following weekends. And then what happened was I asked if I can take her out to dinner and drive up to that area again. And she's like, why don't I come down to San Diego? So she came down, and we discovered that we have the exact same tattoo. It was the first tattoo that I got with my wife, which is a compass with my late wife. And love is the north for me on my compass. And she has a replica, almost precisely the same imagery on her rib cage. And I trained myself to look for signs. And this was a very immense, profound sign. And so it was a really beautiful encouragement from the universe and from Jess, I believe, that this is something important and special. And we weren't rushing it. So I was a widower, which is not something you love putting on your dating resume, right? It's not holding a lot of gravity there. But again, I found self-love. And I knew that somebody's going to have to value me through and through for who I am. And that if somebody doesn't, that's good for me because they're not aligning with my value. And therefore, I'm not wasting my time. I'm not wasting their time. And there's somebody out there for them. But there's somebody who's going to have to step in to be my partner, who's going to have to be secure with me telling them I'm writing a book about my late wife, to have that confidence and her own self-value and her own self-love to stand by there and encourage me and help me and support me through that, and me through her trauma and her past, and for us both to grow together. And ultimately we did. And it's a magical situation, and she moved in, and we had a lot of hardship. We were together for a while, and we definitely went through some learning curve because we were both getting beyond what was holding us back and having to illuminate that and then work ourselves through that through healthy communication and love and support and recreating that in a new space. But I was much more well equipped because I wouldn't be able to do that if I was the man before. And so I'm stepping into this place of a fiance. That's what I became by asking her to marry me one day. And she said yes. And we moved in and started this life, and then ultimately decided that we wanted to be parents. And so now we have a 19-month-old together, little Oliver Holden, and I can honestly say this is the absolute best season of my life because my perspective is trained to see it for what it is. And so I'm really celebrating in humbled gratitude.
So beautiful. And really the heartbreak to happiness, the key to unlock that was self-love.
It really was.
And that, I think, is the message for anyone tuning in who is going through some difficult times right now.
Also, if I could mention it, Joe has done the work here. You're not going to have to go through all of that and go through the world. I think the book is going to take you there, and of course, the whole idea is awakening, and it's awakening to self-love. A lot goes on in our minds, and I know that Joe has discovered, and all of his research and all of the things that he has looked at and the spirituality that is examined has brought him to something that brings him here. And that something is the answer. And that answer, truly, is about loving yourself. So there is a little shorter fast track than having to go around the world for this. But I know there are so many of you out there that have this kind of a situation. And as Joe pointed out, there's levels of it. But wow, to see somebody go through this completely and really dedicate finding the answer is just astonishing to me.
Thank you.
So there is, again, there's a short track to it. The book is going to be something that I think that you're going to want to look at. I love the fact that it says awakening on it. And it's not a sad storybook. It is a redemption book.
Absolutely.
And this is why he's here.
Absolutely. So
Thank
Joe's
you.
website, if you do want to connect with him, joe-hehn.com. And the book again, it's Dreams of Antiquity, The Awakening. And Joe, is there any kind of final message that you want to convey to anyone who is going through some challenging times right now?
Yeah, absolutely. With everything that we just discussed about the vital importance of self-love, it's kind of like reading an Instagram quote. You're just like, hey, you'll be better if you have self-love. It's like, thanks, but how, right? It's like, that's encouraging, but what do I do with that? And so I believe that the habit of better thinking leads to self-love. That to write out your beliefs that make you feel kind of like a victim or imprisoned, or why your life is not what you want it to be, or if there's something or someone missing within it, to write all those out and to incinerate that because it's holding you back, and to recreate your beliefs and write down beliefs that empower you and inspire you to feel good about being who you are in this very moment with the life that you're living, and write that stuff out, and then challenge yourself to incorporate the habit of better thinking. Wake up and think good things about yourself. Look at yourself in the reflection. Have pep talks. Be your own inspirational coach, motivational speaker. Throughout the day, set reminders in your phone saying, I'm proud of you. I love you. I know what it took to get to where you are, and it's inspiring. I'm impressed. Having these kinds of thoughts is replacing the ones that are negative, that are bringing us down and keeping us trapped. And so when we incorporate healthy habits, that leads to a routine, and a routine leads to a lifestyle. And if we incorporate a new lifestyle that is refreshing and empowering, that's a transformation. And that's where real change is made, making the habits to love yourself by journaling, meditating, reading, walking around barefoot, cold showers and baths, helping other people, volunteering, praising yourself, celebrating life, and enriching your experience with love on a habitual basis. And you will look back in not too far of a time and be like, wow, I'm a very different person. And my life is not all that different, but it's a lot more radiant.
So beautiful.
Great.
Thank you, Joe, for
you both.
sharing your story with us. And I love that kind of very simple phrase, make loving yourself a habit. So that's what we want to leave you with as we close out this wonderful episode of another champion of duality, a hero of the heart, Joe Hehn. So make sure you constantly remind yourself to love yourself. Thank you for watching.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.